to the Noir Nation. If I asked you to name me three black serial killers, could you do it? What about a black person that's pulled off a heist of epic proportions? Don't worry, I couldn't either. But being a lover of true crime and all things black, I decided to combine these two passions into a true crime podcast exploring some of the most intriguing and lesser known criminal masterminds with a melanated leading cast. Each week, I will bring you the stories of some of the most prolific criminals you've never heard of. I'm your host, Renee Davis, and this is the Melanin Mayhem podcast. Greetings and salutations, Noir Nation. Your favorite country girl is back with another tantalizing tale for your listening pleasure. If this is your first time, welcome. But if you are already down for the cause and you've been here since the beginning, welcome back, boo. Sweethearts, I have an audacious story for you today. You know, nowadays, when you hear the term illegal immigrants, you tend to think of people coming into the United States illegally, right? You know, we're here in America. We think illegal immigrants are coming to America. But let me tell you, honey, there used to be a time not so long ago when the illegal immigrants were the Americans, boo-boo. Yeah. Let that sink in for a minute. You see, back in 1968, that marked the start of Cuba becoming a beacon of hope for disillusioned Americans whose backs were against the wall with no place to go. This week, I'm going to take you back to the 70s, baby. We're going to go back to the time of bell bottoms and afros and get off into some gangster shit about three militant, melanated mayhem makers that set it off, then threw the middle fingers to the law as they flew away to freedom. This week's is a trio. Allow me to introduce you to Mr. Charles Lee Hill, Mr. Michael Finney, and Mr. Ralph L. Goodwin, aka the Three Amigos. Charles Lee Hill was born in 1949 in rural Illinois. His mama was a domestic and his dad was a brick mason. And around 1964-ish, when it was time for Charles to go to high school, the family moved to Oakland, California. And this would be right around the time when LA would explode with the Watts riots and all. Shit was popping off left, right, and sideways. Black rights groups were forming like the Black Panthers and other groups, and the government felt that they were all being militant and subversive. Vietnam was going on, and black men were either coming home in body bags or coming home with their minds permanently altered. The draft was also a real thing, and when Charles turned 17, he went on ahead and enlisted, not necessarily because he wanted to, but because at the time, if you were under 18 years old, they didn't send you to the front lines. So he went on ahead and enlisted, because Charles wanted to be as far away from the front lines as humanly possible. So when he did enlist, they sent him to Europe. He bounced around Italy and Denmark and Germany, working logistics for the army. Now, of course, there was still racism, but Charles said it was manageable. It wasn't like the racism he faced at home. Charles felt like he'd had a relatively safe passage during his time in the army. He didn't see no real combat like that, and he was cool with it. So he was home in Oakland on leave when the war kind of went left, like all hands on deck were required. Charles was like, I don't know what the fuck they talking about. And while he was trying to figure out what his next move was going to be, why the military police showed up at his front door. Yes, indeed. Knock, knock. Who's there? It's us, and you coming with us. Baby, they yanked that ass up. It was like, nah, bruh, your ass is fighting today. And that's crazy to me because I know about the selective service. When you turn 18 and you get your new driver's license or you register to vote, there's always a little box there that says, do you want to sign up for a selective service? And I know kind of sort of in my mind that it's mandatory for men, but since I've been cognizant of, how the world works, I've never known of anyone being drafted. So to use my imagination and see that military policeman standing at Charles's house talking about, let's go, bruh, and Charles not have any recourse but to go, it kind of blows my mind a little bit. Because they put Charles's ass in a car and took him straight to the airport. Like, fuck your plans. I don't care what you had going on today or this weekend. Boo boo, you on your way back to Vietnam to go fight. So Charles is on a plane back to Vietnam. This time he wasn't on the easy street side of things. They sent that ass straight to where all the bullshit was popping off. Charles says that there was multiple firefights every single day. I can't even imagine. I can. I did see Forrest Gump. I watch a few movies and, in Forrest Gump, him and Bubba, they were in Nam and shit was crazy, but they only had one real firefight. Y'all know the one where when that bullet up and bit Forrest in the ass? Yeah. If that shit was popping off every single day, all day, I would have probably come to the same conclusion that Charles is about to come to. You see, Charles decided that these people hadn't done anything to him or his peoples, so he was wondering why the fuck was he over there fucking with them. And after 4 months of trying not to get killed by the Viet Cong, he decided, you know what? I'm out this bitch. And Charles goes AWOL. In his exact words, quote, they can call me a coward all they want, but I made up my mind not to go back. You motherfuckers ain't gonna see me no more. End quote. If that ain't one of the blackest things, you think we won't tell a motherfucker when we done and what we ain't gonna do? Charles is in the whole army and it's like, in the middle of a firefight, I am done. And so Charles went and he got him some rations. And if you don't know, that's the food in the military. They call it rations. He got him some water and he went to a bunker up on a hill and he stayed there. He sent word to his sergeant that he was on break until further notice. The audacity of it all. But it's also some young shit because, again, Charles is young at this point. So they came and they got Charles's ass. He was court-martialed and they stripped him of all his rank. But see, the thing is, they still needed bodies for this war. So they said, here's what we're going to do. You fucked up, but we just going to take your rank and give you a stern talking to. Don't you do that shit no more. And we're going to let this one slide, but we finna send your black ass right on back to war. Well, Charles was like, y'all motherfuckers is not reading the room, obviously. I said I'm done. Bitch, I have clocked out. I'm just waiting on my ride back to Oakland. I will be in the break room, y'all know, the bunker on the hill, until further notice. Let me know when my Uber get here. Now, this was way before Uber, but you get the idea. Well, the Army did not receive that well. You know what I'm saying? You can't just tell them what you is or is not gonna do. So they snatched his ass up again. And this time, after the court, they sent his ass to Long Bin Jail to fill sandbags. Let me tell you something. That sounds like an even trade to me. The front line or prison filling up some bags with some sand? Yeah, I'll take prison. So for Charles, it felt like it was safer to be in prison than to be on the front line at war. He had to, learn the ways of prison, kind of like how the guards were not to be fucked with, as Charles unfortunately found out. Charles said, a black officer was giving him a hard time and he was finna put him in the hole because he didn't jump to attention when he walked by. So, Charles was trying to be Billy Badass. Fuck you, nigga. I do what the fuck I want to do. And then they beat that ass for old and new. Like, sir, don't you write no checks that your ass can't cash. Man, they beat Charles so bad, he had to be transferred to a hospital to recover. But Charles didn't mind, though. He said the food was the bomb and wasn't nobody trying to kill his ass. He just had to talk to the shrinks, them head doctors. And when they was asking him, well, Mr. Hill, how do you feel? Charles said he told them, I'm in some bullshit war. Back home, they killing my people. How the fuck do you think I feel? Exactly. Well, after, talking to the head doctors, they went on ahead and kicked Charles' ass to the curb shortly thereafter, and he returned back to Oakland. All his people are on some political time right now, right? Everybody is focused on politics, right? So, Charles, he hooked up with one of his cousins and some more friends, and they were a part of a group called the Republic of New Africa. And now the mission statement for the RNA, it said that they wanted to reclaim the South for Black people. They wanted to make the southern states our own little black nation, separate from the rest of America. And they chose the South because if blacks were actually given their 40 acres and a mule that they were promised when we were emancipated, and when you have about 30 million black people, give or take, in America, that would be roughly the land mass of the southern states. And in my opinion, I guess the mules would probably do better in the South, but I digress. But even with that slightly unrealistic goal, the RNA was doing positive stuff in the hood. They taught black kids math and black history and self-defense. They ran a kitchen so that people who were in need of food always had a place to come get a meal. They served the children breakfast every morning. They had free daycare for parents that worked. These people were looking out for the community, right? And then we got Michael Finney. He grew up in a middle class household in the 60s. His father was the first black police officer in San Francisco. Go look it up. He also attended private Catholic school when he was in grade school. And then when it was time for him to go to high school, he was a part of one of those busing campaigns, where they take children from the black school and bus them over across town to the white school. The nigga was well educated. He got real into political activism when he started going over there to that white school, though, in high school. I guess hearing, "Go home, nigger," with that hard ER, that'll do it to you. But old Michael was getting a steady diet of Martin, along with a real steady diet of Malcolm. That dude jumped down with both feet with the Black Panther Party. He wanted to be just like the Panthers. He started dressing in all black, his little black beret tilted to the side. You couldn't tell that nigga nothing. But old Michael was a determined and gifted young man, and one of his teachers saw just how special he was and encouraged him to attend college at Berkeley in 1968. Michael did it, but he continued while he was at Berkeley to fight for the people, power to the people. And the more political he got, the less interested he was in college. When you organizing and getting arrested for rallying and speaking up for your people, he was in jail more than he was in the classroom. So it's no surprise that he eventually dropped out of school in 1970. He and his girl got married and they had a baby girl named Malika. A year later, oh, baby Malika. Now, Michael bounced around to a bunch of dead-end jobs that wasn't making no kind of ends meet in no kind of way, and he was becoming more disillusioned with American racist policies, and he was just getting real militant. Michael went and got himself a gun and got down real hard with the RNA. Oakland wasn't the only location for the RNA, though. They had satellite branches all over the United States, including their headquarters in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, the RNA, with that slightly unrealistic mission statement, they were squarely in the sights of the alphabet boys. You know who I'm talking about: FBI, CIA, PD. Anybody that had the word agency, bureau, or department in their name, they targeted and infiltrated pro-black groups in the 60s and 70s, labeling them as radicals and militants, right? Those motherfuckers was ruthless in their pursuits to stamp out anything or anyone that wanted equal rights and the betterment for melanated people. Now, you would think that they subscribed to Malcolm X because, they was on some by any means necessary type of bullshit. And they were fucking up these pro-black organizations. And on August 18th, 1971, the cops and the FBI attacked the RNA headquarters in Jackson, Mississippi. They burnt that bitch to the ground. They came in with machine guns and full body armor. Baby, this is not a drill. One officer was shot and killed. And do you know that 11 members of that RNA chapter were charged with murder and state treason, which mean they got the death penalty in M.I., crooked letter I, humpback I. Come on now, y'all know how to spell Mississippi. So when word got back to Oakland about what had happened, Charles and Michael and another brother down for the cause, dude named Ralph Goodwin, they was ready to load up and ride out to Mississippi to go help their brothers in the struggle. They were going to go down there to help them to rebuild and restructure and come back better than ever. So the guys, they rent a car in San Francisco and they prepare to drive to Jackson. The plan was to go down to Mississippi, straighten out these crackers, show them who the fuck they was fucking with, and then bring that ass back to Cali. That sounds perfectly reasonable, right? A road trip with the homies, whoop a little ass, text a few names, and then bring that ass on back to the house. They had no idea that this road trip would be a one-way ticket from which they would never return to life as they knew it. Now, everything I've told you thus far has come from Charles's and Michael's perspective. Now I'm going to lay it on you how they described what happened next. Now, when they started relaying the story, shit started getting real vague, as only black people can do it. It's some real key details that they never, ever, ever get into. So, we have to rely on newspaper accounts and legal documents to kind of try to fill in the blanks. But here's what we have. Charles and his crew of two homies, they jump in the car and they head to Mississippi. This much everybody agrees on, right? There was a car. They weren't taking a train or a bus to the Delta area. Their mode of transportation leaving Oakland was a vehicle. Okay, got it. Charles's version is that they were headed to Jackson when they got pulled over in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then he says they ditched the car, went to a friend's house, that they played keep away from the cops for more than 2 weeks, and even at one point was living in a hole in the desert with not much food and water. Not many details in that account, is it, huh? Like, why you had to ditch the car, Charles? What happened after y'all came out the hole in the desert? You see, old Charlie get real vague at this point. He don't really want to get into too many details, but the kind of people we are, we want to know what the fuck happened. Well, let me tell you the story from the perspective of law enforcement. November 8th, 1971, New Mexico State Trooper Robert Rosenblum is getting ready to get off his shift. Now, just to be fully transparent, Officer Rosenblum is white. And with a name like Rosenblum, you probably already figured that out. But we like to cover as many bases as we can cover here at the Mayhem factory. When Officer Rosenblum is done with his shift and he is about to call it a night, for some unknown reason, he decides to pull over a green 1972 Ford Galaxy occupied by three men on the side of Interstate 40, 8 miles outside of Albuquerque at 10:47 p.m. at night. Why did he pull the car over? We don't know. Of course, they labeled it as a routine traffic stop. And in the 70s, and shit, in 2024, it's not a far reach to say the routine was pulling over DWBs. Driving while black. Anyway, the car pulls over. What happened next? Only those four human beings know. What is a fact is that he stopped the car at 10:47 p.m. He called in for a license plate check at 10:53 p.m. And at 10:55 p.m., the dispatch tries to hit him back to let him know that one, the car is not stolen, nor is it reported as being wanted, but dispatch doesn't get an answer from Officer Rosenblum. At 11:11 p.m., some 16 minutes later, someone gets on Officer Rosenblum's car radio and says, "One of your policemen has been injured. Send an ambulance." We also know for a fact the three black men drove away from that traffic stop. Officer Rosenblum was on the side of the road, dead, shot to death. The three black men left the area in the green Ford that was pulled over because when they got to the scene, it wasn't there. Right? So we know they left in the car. Now, the police found the Ford the next day in a vacant lot in Albuquerque. They processed the car. It had been rented in San Francisco, and it was a gold mine of clues. You see, Michael left a suitcase with his passport and some guns in it. Ammunition, books that had his name on the covers and shit. There were credit card receipts for gas and another receipt for some guns in Ralph's name. Then the car had a shitload of fingerprints. So we got everybody, right? The police are running down the names. They go to the store where the credit card receipt was from to see if they could get a description, and after some old school shoe leather detective work, the cops know the names of the offenders that they are about to charge with murder. There's 20-year-old Michael Finney from San Francisco, 24-year-old Ralph Goodwin from Berkeley, and 21-year-old Charles Lee Hill from Oakland. And they are indeed charged with murder and weapons charges. Now they just got to figure out where these niggas at. So what do? First off, they put $1,000 reward on the head for anybody who can give any information leading to an arrest. I'm telling you now, Crime Stoppers has been around for a long time, you know. So after they put that bounty out there, they locked the city of Albuquerque down. Like when I say locked it down, they had cops everywhere, roadblocks everywhere. If you were black, your ass was stopped, searched, and questioned because you know every black person knows every other black person. And since these black people weren't from around here, these some outsiders, y'all should be able to spot these black people easy and tell us where the fuck they at. Well, they didn't. Well, they did, but they didn't at the time. Charles says they stayed with friends for a couple of days on some real underground railroad type of shit. They was going from house to house. They'll spend a few hours over here, then they'll get spooked, and then they'll go somewhere else and spend an hour. I mean, they stayed on the move. People were sympathetic to the cause, and so they were trying to help get the three out of Albuquerque, but there was no way they could get in anything with wheels, like a car, a bus, a train. The police weren't letting nothing move without searching it. Michael says he was even walking around in pink hot pants, a wig, and makeup. Let me tell you something. A motherfucker ain't got no problems dressing in drag when the cops want that ass. But any other time, y'all homophobic than a motherfucker. But you know, I ain't gonna even get into that. Let me tell you something. Even with disguises, it was too much. Like, it was too much. The block was too fucking hot. They had to bounce. Like, you got to get out this city some way, somehow. The people were down. They wanted to help, but you can't put everybody that you come in contact with in danger. The law is very clear on aiding and abetting, baby. And everybody that lent them a helping hand was a possible prison sentence waiting to happen. Yeah. So they had to do it on their own. They say a friend eventually gave them a ride out to the desert. I guess there were no roadblocks heading to the desert. That same friend who drove them out to the desert, he got a year for taking them out to the desert. Now, once in the desert, they went underground. And I mean, literally, they went underground. They dug holes in the ground, and that's where they hid all day long. In the desert, about to burn the fuck up during the daytime, freezing to death at night. They said they put some bushes over the holes and an old raggedy sofa that just so happened to be out in the desert in front of the holes. So, you know, if anybody just so happened to be driving by and they was popped up, they wouldn't be able to see them. But at some point, they've got to come up with a plan because you can only stay in a hole in the desert before somebody die. I mean, it's the desert and you in a hole, you basically really dug your own grave. They don't have that much food, don't have enough water for 3 grown men to survive very long, again, in the desert. Them niggas had to come up with a master plan, and plan they did. Now, even though every cop in New Mexico was on their ass, they did elude the dragnet that was set out for them. The cops think they know where they are because, you know, somebody snitched and dropped a dime and was trying to get their reward money. And they said that the guys was hiding out in the hood. It was over at some apartments over in the 3400 block of Gibson. You know, that's over there in the black section of town. So the police, they posse up with their shotguns and shit, and they ready to go over here and blast off. And so they go over and they search each and every one of the 21 apartments on that block, but they were too late. The Three Amigos were already gone. Charles's mama also lived in Albuquerque. You know they went and tossed her house, but they didn't find nothing and she didn't say nothing. Meanwhile, back at the hole in the ground, a master plan was indeed hatched, and the Three Amigos was about to be out this bitch. Now, when I tell you this next part, I don't want you to envision the airport as it is today, post 9/11. Before the planes took down the World Trade Center, flying was a whole different type of vibe. And if you weren't there, let me describe it to you a little bit. Like, security was not a thing. It was just assumed that everybody coming to the airport was good people. You could even go with whoever was flying out. You could walk with them all the way to the gate, watch them get on the plane and wave bye-bye as they taxied away, right? All without a ticket. And in the 70s, jet bridges were not a thing yet. So to get on a plane, you had to walk out on the tarmac and walk up a set of portable steps to get on board the plane. TSA wasn't even a thought at this time. Of course, they had top flight security, you know, 1 or 2 Barney Fifes around just for show. But all in all, people didn't set it off at the airport. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a visual about what type of environment we're going to be in. And so now I'm going to take you back to the plan that these niggas done hatched up. So the plan is they know that they're not going to be able to get a fair trial, right? There's no way they can turn themselves in, at least in their minds. They are wanted cop killers, so they've got to get out of town. They can't take a bus. They can't drive because of the roadblocks. So how are they going to get out of Albuquerque and where are they going to go? They decided they were going to go to Africa, going back to the motherfucking motherland. Okay, Nay. If they couldn't leave Albuquerque on a bus, how the fuck they gonna get to Africa? Easy. They were gonna take a plane. Mm-hmm. So they wake up early on the morning of November 27th, 1971. And when they woke up, the plan was mostly in place, but not quite all the way in place. Y'all know how we do. We got the general idea of what we want to do. We'll figure out the pieces as we go along, right? So we need to know, first of all, how the hell are we going to get from this hole in the desert to the airport? And what time the flight's gonna be? Somebody gotta go do some reconnaissance. And that was Charles. He got out the hole and there was a convenience store not too far down the street. And so he walked to the store to get some food and some water, as well as to use the payphone. So he's going to call the airline up to see what flights are leaving from the Albuquerque airport that day. Now, mind you, this is the holiday season. This is Thanksgiving, right? And so when Charles calls, he finds out that there is a TWA Flight 106 from Albuquerque to Chicago that was leaving at 10:55 p.m. that night. That would be perfect. It'd be dark. The darkness would help conceal them. Okay, I can roll with you so far. Okay. But even with lax security, all the airports have a border fence around them, and they still needed to figure out how they were going to get through said fence and onto the tarmac to the plane, figuring it out as we go. So they put their heads together for another little group session powwow right quick, and boom, they figured out they needed to call a tow truck. So they call a tow for a non-existent car. And when the tow man gets there, of course, they pull out their weapons on him and tell him, okay, drive. And the tow truck driver is like, baby, where you want to go? I'm taking you wherever you want to be. So, mind you, the flight leaves at 10:55 p.m. They jack the tow truck driver to like 10:45 p.m. They are cutting it close as a motherfucker. I tell you, that CP time don't even matter, man, whether you wanted by the police or not. We still gonna just take our time and ease on our way. So the man drives them to the airport and they just bust through the gate. Just drive straight through it. Because remember, top flight is just here for show, not for no actual security. They drive, they see the plane. Okay, boom, we hear it. The plan is almost fulfilled. So the plan is that Charles is going to lay on the ground with a rifle while the other two head to the plane. That way, if anything pop off, he can cover them. So Ralph and Michael, they go to the plane, they walk up the steps, and they board. Charles gets up as there's one last person waiting to get on the plane, and Charles falls in right behind his white man. And when they step across the threshold, nobody realizes that the passenger has a gun in his back. The three amigos tell the pilot, this is a stick up. I know you thought you were going to Chicago tonight, but there has been a slight change in the itinerary. We are going to Africa. And the pilot, he ain't want no smoke. He said, quote, the aircraft is yours, sir. Now, by now, the tow truck driver has found somebody on the premises and told them that he was jacked and that the men that jacked him are now on a plane. But the cops, it's too late. The doors of the plane are closed and it's about to taxi out with 43 passengers and a 6-person crew, all hostages. Now, let me pause here again and remind you this is pre 9/11. Cockpit doors are not closed and locked, so Charles and his crew are able to see and hear everything. And even though the police are right outside and the plane hasn't left yet, there is absolutely nothing that they can do. But what I really want to tell y'all is that, baby, hijacking a plane in the 60s and early 70s was a real thing, and it happened all the time. Like up until the late 50s, it was unheard of for somebody to commandeer a plane, right? From 1931, when the first ever hijacking in the world happened, until 1957, there were less than 20 hijackings, and most of those took place in Europe. But as with all things, the first time something happens, that door is kicked wide open, and now everybody want to do it, so it seems. And for some reason, Cuba was the top choice of all places to go. But when you look at the time period between 1961 and 1973, do you know that there were 159 hijacked planes? And 85 of the 159 went to Cuba. It got so bad that the pilots were threatening to strike immediately. Not immediately. They were threatening to strike immediately. Y'all know that's when we not playing when it's immediately. Because they were tired of getting jacked. I mean, can you imagine it? I came up in the menace to society era, right? I know about cars getting jacked, right? That's a whole nother thing, though, to get your jet jacked. And it's a whole nother level of audacity if we just gonna talk about this type of crime. It is here in this moment in time that airport security starts to become a thing, though. It was just as easy to steal a plane as it was to steal a car. Nobody stopped them. No fighter jets were scrambled. They were just commandeering the plane's flight crew because let's be honest, none of these motherfuckers could fly a plane. I might do a series of episodes dedicated to the melanated motherfuckers that hopped a plane to avoid prosecution. Because let me tell you, there are several. I told y'all, no matter what the situation is, it's some black people out there doing that shit too. It was so common. While they were in the air, the flight attendant was walking down the aisle and she was telling the passengers, don't y'all worry. I've been in this situation a couple of times. Everything be just fine. Oh, baby girl was cool as a cucumber, honey. But back to the story. So the cops are on the tarmac. Charles gets on the mic and tell the flight controller, look, y'all got 10 seconds to get the fuck out of our way or I'm going to have to take some measures. Okay, Charles, I see you. And he meant that shit too. And they must have felt it and read the room correctly because they did indeed. Move, bitch, get out the way. Get out the way, bitch, get out the way. Y'all know I'm ratchet. Just excuse me. Anywho, and then the plane takes off. Now, when they were airborne, the captain was like, hey, can I holler at you for a second? See, I know you want to go to Africa, but sir, this plane is not built for that. It can't carry enough fuel to make that flight. So Charles was like, all right, let me think. Change of plans. So him and the guys, they huddle up and they trying to figure out, so where the fuck should we go? And they still on some African continent type of thinking, right? And the pilot was still ear hustling and decides to interject, I'm sorry, but we ain't got enough gas for that either. Then Charles hit him with the look. You know the look. We found about that look last week with Christopher Scarver. Well, the pilot understood the look, and he didn't offer no more of his opinions. He just said, we'll take you wherever you want to go, some kind of way. Now, this is the funny shit. The same flight attendant that was telling the passengers to just be cool, she piped up and said, y'all should try Cuba. I've heard that the Cuban government is sympathetic to people in your situation. It'll be fine. And so Charles and them thought about it for a minute. And they was like, shit, bet it up. We had forgot about Cuba. So it was decided that they would make a pit stop in Tampa to refuel. We want to make sure we got enough gas to make the flight. But they were going to stay on the runway. They weren't going to take no chances. They were not going to park anywhere near the airport building itself. They were going to stay far out on the tarmac on the runway. And they wanted them to send a fuel truck to refuel the plane and then to send a passenger bus to bring the passengers back to the airport buildings because the passengers were going to be released, but not the flight crew. They had to stay with the hijackers to make sure that the flight made it all the way to Cuba. Again, they can't fly no airplane and somebody's got to be able to serve the water and peanuts, so they still need the stewardesses, right? So when the passengers were deplaned, they were questioned by law enforcement and they said, the hijackers were courteous during the hijacking. One account that I found particularly amusing, it tickled my little funny bone, was a man that said when the hijackers did eventually sit down, they gave a soul shake to some of the hippie passengers on board. What the fuck is a soul shake? Oh, you mean they gave some dap? Okay. And, speaking of hippies, You gotta love the hippies because they always down for the cause and they always a good time. And this plane ride was no different. They say them hippies was up there singing and writing poems commemorating the event to celebrate, quote, the three black warriors taking over the belly of a silver bird. Loud Miss Gussie, whoo. These hippies even volunteered to go with them to Cuba. I told y'all, man, a good old hippie be down for the cause, my nigga. But no, thank you. You can go on out here and get off in Tampa. So we've let the passengers off, and now the next stop is Cuba. They touched down at 6:49 a.m. on November 28th, 1971, and in their minds, they thought that Fidel Castro was going to be there to welcome them with open arms and a marching band and laying out the red carpet and shit. They was wrong. A uniformed officer of the Cuban Department of State met them at the plane door and asked them what the fuck they was doing in Cuba. They said, oh, we here because we are political exiled. And then they immediately arrested them on the tarmac of the Jose Marti Airport. And they had a 45, a 9, a 38, a sawed-off shotgun, a rifle, and a knife that were confiscated because we can't have y'all up in here able to start some real shit. The Cuban authorities put the 6 members of the flight crew, that was 3 pilots and 3 flight attendants, they put them up in a hotel and they returned back to the U.S. the next day unharmed after their little unexpected jaunt down to the island of Cuba. And when they were interviewed by law enforcement, they said, they was all right. That they spent most of the flight talking and shooting the shit. There were 2 flight attendants, one named Elizabeth Calbury and one named Shirley Ann Harrell, and they said everybody was real relaxed. They were giving us skin. Sir, excuse me, not y'all was up at 30,000 feet talking about give me 5 on the black hand side in this bitch. Stop it. Oh my God, I love my people. They said, now these flight attendants, I'm saying, they said that they were so damn relaxed. They even started talking about the shooting of that state trooper. She said that they said Michael, the youngest, the baby of the crew, was the trigger man. It's always the youngest. Now, I don't know if I believe that. I can believe that they were relaxed. I can believe that they was slapping fire. I can believe that they was talking some shit about all mannerisms of things. But do I believe that they confessed to any type of crime other than hijacking that plane? I don't think so. I think somebody might have brought up that trooper and they might have sidestepped it. They probably said they didn't know what was going on, which was why they were leaving. But I do not believe with anything in my heart, soul, mind, body, and spirit that these 3 men was up here confessing to killing a police officer. I don't believe it. But I do believe that they was up there trying to recruit people to join the Republic of New Africa because they said that each and every black passenger on board, that the 3 guys went and talked to them about the advantages of being counselors with the Republic of New Africa and how they should help to set up new branches and shit. They was on their recruitment drive. I believe that wholeheartedly. But do I believe that they were up there talking about that crime? Hell to the no, because that ain't what we do. Meanwhile, back in Cuba, the trio, they're in custody. They go immediately from the airport to a Cuban jail to solitary confinement. They were questioned extensively so that the Cuban government could build a dossier about their private lives and get all their background information and shit. Because, the Cubans have got to determine if these hijackers are really here for political exile or are they on some spy shit, with the CIA or something. You got to know who you letting in your house. Don't you know who coming across your threshold? Cuba felt the same way. They kept the guys in solitary confinement for 6 weeks. And once they made it out of solitary, the Cubanos put them up in one of several houses that were set aside just for the hijackers. I told y'all this was some common shit. It was so common that Cuba already had housing in place for whenever somebody randomly showed up unexpected at their doorsteps. Now here's a history factoid for you. Why Cuba? Like, did they not have an extradition agreement with the U.S.? Sure they did. They just never enforced it because they didn't think that the U.S. reciprocated on that agreement. Because you see, in their eyes, Cubans also fled Cuba, right? And they would leave in planes and boats and shit. And Cuba felt that when they left Cuba, they were hijacking whatever method of transportation that they used to haul ass. And since most times they ended up on American soil, they felt that the U.S. should have extradited them back to Cuba the same way they wanted Cuba to send any American that landed on Cuban soil back to America. Well, Cuba did send the aircraft as well as the crew that went along with the aircraft. They could have kept those planes, but they didn't. But what they didn't do was send the humans back. So I guess that, in a way, is how and why Cuba became a hijacker's paradise. But here's the gotcha. The Cuban people, they didn't care for them goddamn hijackers. They did not want them on their little island. Look, y'all were not invited to the cookout. Y'all just showed up. And like most black people, they was being nice, and so they made them a plate. I mean, come on, New Orleans Nation, let's be honest here. It wasn't like it was a bunch of lawyers and doctors and school teachers and preachers and shit hijacking these airplanes. Come on now, church, don't get quiet on me now. It was a bunch of criminals fleeing prosecution. They had done a crime or had so much heat on their asses that the only thing that they could do was commit another crime to get to Cuba. And Cuba was like, fuck, we don't want their ass. But since you want them, I ain't gonna give them back. You know, because Cuba and the U.S. have always had some type of passive aggressive, big brother, little sister type of relationship going on. So Cuba was like, fuck you. We don't want them, but we'll keep them just because you want them, right? And so, this idealistic view of Cuba that the asylum seekers had romanticized in their American dreams turned quickly to a never ending nightmare. The cakewalk that they were expecting, it never materialized. There was a negative stigma attached to being a hijacker, and they stuck out like titties on a bull. It just was a thing. So Charles and his crew were over at the hijacker house, and it's full to capacity of hijackers and political refugees. Each bedroom had a bunch of bunk beds in there, and the doors had no locks on them. Y'all don't need to lock nothing, because when we want to come in, we coming in. They showed the guys where their bunks were, and so began their new life in Cuba. Now, they were granted political asylum, and then they were put to work in the sugarcane fields. Charles and his little crew settled into life as field niggas, literally, because working in them sugarcane fields from dawn to dusk ain't no joke. But Charles and them, they were some quick learners, and they learned Spanish and how to live in Cuba, which was basically don't ask no and keep your motherfucking head down. Now, the homies, they still wanted to go to Africa. You know, Cuba was not their first choice. And if there was any chance of them getting to Africa, they were willing to do it. And they were hoping that Cuba would be able to help them get to Africa. But Cuba was like, nah, bruh. See, they could let them stay in Cuba without any smoke because of the political asylum, right? But to give them a Cuban passport and then let them skip off to the motherland, that would be considered exporting terrorism, which was a big fucking deal, right? And Cuba didn't want that smoke. So the only choices that they had, you either go back to the US and face the music or you stay your ass in Cuba. So Charles stayed in the hijack house for about 3 years. And in 1974-ish, 75-ish, him and the boys, they were moved out of the hijack house and into hotels to live in, right? And they saw a lot of people coming in and out of the island, like Huey Newton and other members of the Black Panthers. And he saw them come and he saw them go, but he was still there. He was able to see the revolution up close and personal, right? And for the last 52 and a half years, they've called Cuba home. Charles has been there living his life, and I would say that he started over, but he was only 21 years old when he fled the U.S. He hadn't even started his American adult life when you think about how it all started. I mean, he went from high school, dropping out, to the military. And in the military, you weren't free to do as you please. He was a soldier. He had orders to follow. He went where they told him to go, when they told him to go, for how long they told him to be there. And then he fucks his life up and has to dip off when he should have been experiencing life as a 20-something in America. So for me, his life actually started in Cuba. He has been there way longer than he was ever in the U.S. He started a family. He's got kids. I don't know if it's a missus or not, or if he's still on that American shit and he just got a baby mama. I don't know. But he will never, ever, ever see his family again. There will be no visits to mama's house. And you know, death is a part of life, and I am quite sure that he has missed countless funerals, maybe even his own mother's. That's a hell of a trade-off. His freedom at the expense of familial ties. And he admits that it's hard. Charles misses the fuck out of his family, but he don't miss them enough to step one motherfucking foot on U.S. soil and face the music. So, Nate, what happened to the homies? Well, Michael Finney, he settled into life into Cuba as well. In the 80s, he married a nice little Cuban girl, but got divorced about a year and a half later. He tried to go back to college, but after 3 years, he gave that shit up too. Michael was just restless because he wasn't ready to accept that Cuba was the last stop for him, right? He and a couple of his compadres, they tried to escape the island, ran off to a Caribbean island that he wouldn't name, and that Caribbean island turned that ass right around and sent him right back to Cuba. So he had to be resigned to his fate. There was nothing that he could do. So he made the best out of it. Like I said, they lived in hotels for about 10 years, and then there was a change in the law that said if you lived in a hotel permanently, then you were due a house or an apartment of your own. So they gave him a little apartment, and then he ended up settling into a little rundown house, but it was his. He had a little girl, and he ends up working as a radio announcer, which in my opinion was a good fucking job. I mean, it's an upgrade compared to working in the sugarcane fields. But oh, Michael did have almost a little situation. See, Cupid does compulsory AIDS testing. They say that when you get tested, that's exactly what you do. If they tell you to go get tested, you go get motherfucking tested. Well, Michael ignored the notice that they sent him to go get tested. And one day, somebody from the state showed up at his house and took that ass to the hospital because, nigga, I said go get this motherfucking AIDS test. Well, when they tested Michael, the test came back positive. And a positive test in Cuba means you get sent to a state sanitarium, which is a bougie name for a mental hospital, and there you remain quarantined from the rest of the island for the rest of your whole life. Oh, Jesus. Cuba was not fucking around. And Michael ass was sweating bullets up in this bitch. Cause like, I bet it was that dirty bitch. You know, you start thinking about who the fuck you done slept with when it's time for that AIDS test. Well, they did a second test to confirm the first test, and the second test came back negative. Ooh, Michael dodged a bullet on that one, baby. But while, Michael did not step foot on U.S. soil, he did have family that came to Cuba to see him. His mama came to see him twice, his daddy came to see him once, and Lord have mercy, his daughter. You remember he had gotten married to his girl and had a baby before he left. She was only like 2 when all this shit went down. Well, in 1988, when she was 21 years old, the same age her father was when he had to leave the U.S. forever, she left the U.S. to go to Cuba to visit her daddy. Look at God. Won't he will? Will he won't? And as for Ralph Goodwin, unfortunately, he died in 1975 in a drowning accident trying to save somebody else's life. And that, New War Nation, is the story of Charles Hill, Michael Finney, and Ralph Goodwin. 3 soul brothers that said they didn't hear nothing, they didn't see nothing, and they didn't know nothing. Yet they hauled ass on the first thing smoking, literally. Charles and Michael, the only 2 remaining members that are alive, are still on the FBI most wanted fugitive list for murder and hijacking. I have given you 3 audacious brothers that, of course, you've never heard of. I really hope you enjoyed our little trip on the Soul Train. And you know the drill right there on your screen. You can like, subscribe, or leave a review. Go on, show me some love, because you know it ain't no fun if your homies can't have none. Tell them all about your new favorite true crime podcast, right? And I would love it if you left me a review after you listen. I mean, you made it this far. You might as well go ahead and go on across the way, right? So if you don't feel like typing, you can always just hit that 5-star. Then I need you, again, don't keep this to yourself. Be free with it. Be harsh with the podcast. Tell it to everybody. Give a little bit to everybody, right? Put it in the group chat. If you're on social media, you can find me on Twitter at Melanin Mayhem PC and on Facebook and Instagram at Melanin Mayhem Podcast. And if you know of a melanated mayhem maker that you'd like for me to do an episode on, go ahead and drop me a line over at melaninmayhempodcast@gmail.com, and I'll take a look and do a little bit of research. Until next week, New War Nation, y'all know the drill. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. It's one love, New Orleans Nation, and I am out.
Wow.